So without further ado, I would like to introduce my good friend and mentor, Linda Brown, Dr. Linda Brown. She has 34 years of experience serving students with special needs who have a wide range of disabilities. Linda is an educational specialist at the Oregon Department of Education. Prior to joining Oregon Department of Ed in 2016, Linda served the students of Silver Falls School District, that's in Silverton, Oregon, as Director of Special Services for 12 years. From 1983 to 1997, Linda was special ed teacher supporting students grades K through 12 with a wide range of needs in the state of Ohio. From 97 to 2004, Linda worked with special needs students at the Willamette Education Service District as an EIECSE specialist and evaluator. Linda has attended Morehead State University, that's in Morehead, Kentucky, Ohio State University, Portland State University, and George Fox University. In 2007, Linda graduated from George Fox with a Doctor of Education degree. She's going to speak to us today on the 10 things that special educators should know about traumatic brain injury. And I want to just say that our dear friend Linda will be retiring in December, which is heartbreaking to me. Happy for you, Linda, but we wanted to bring her in just because she's just left such a legacy to share with her great wisdom. And so without further ado, my good friend, Linda Brown.
Yeah, let me share my screen and we'll get going. There's that. And I need to put this one in presentation mode. Okay, are we up and going? Ooh, that's a little miracle. All right, well, we're going to have just a little bit of time here to talk about traumatic brain injury and kind of the programs and the things that impact students with traumatic brain injury. So let's go over our agenda. This is going to be a whirlwind tour. We're going to talk a little bit about who we serve in the state of Oregon. It's kind of surprising when you actually see the numbers. We'll talk about regional inclusive services, a little bit about what the role of a TBI liaison is. We'll talk about the special education evaluation process, 504s, House Bill 4140. We'll talk a little bit about next steps and focus and kind of where ODE in Oregon's kind of moving toward the future. We'll talk about some support for school teams and families. And then we have a cute little video that our liaisons put together. And then just a little information about how I'm here to help. So let's talk about the students we serve. As you can see, we have about 79,000 special education students in the state of Oregon. That number is always kind of surprising to folks. A little over 10,000 students with autism, communication, a little over 16,000. Deaf-blind students, 31. So that's less than 1% of all the students in the state of Oregon. Deaf and hard of hearing, 928 kids. Again, that's less than 1%. Emotional disturbance, about 5,000. Intellectual disability, 3,600. And so intellectual disability, we see that number slowly going down. Other health impaired up to 14,000. And that's the area we see continually growing, particularly in the area of ADHD and more mental health type of things are falling under that. Orthopedic impairment, about 552 kids. Traumatic brain injury, only 313. That number is shocking and concerning to me, especially given all of our data around emergency room visits. That number is really low. Specific learning disability, 22,000, and vision, 296. And so the ones that are highlighted and bold, those are the low incidence disabilities in the state of Oregon. So just kind of grinding ourselves, where are our students, who are we serving? So regional inclusive services actually is a system that's been around since 1965, so way before IDA. And back then, our partners, our educators back then, really relied heavily on our medical folks to really kind of give us some guidance and insight in hopes of having equitable services across the state. We started having low incidence disabilities with regional programs. And so you see the low incidence disability areas included there. For students with a visual impairment or are blind, that's a direct service. So we have teachers of visually impaired that provide services. Deaf and hard of hearing, again, that's a direct service. These students are learning, sometimes learning sign language or learning how to use their FM devices. So again, that's a direct service, and as well as deafblind. So those low incidence disabilities are direct services. And then when we look at autism, orthopedic impairment, and traumatic brain injury, they're more of a consultative model, and not necessarily because in Oregon we think that's the best way to serve students, but as we look at the funding for regional inclusive services really hasn't kept up with the needs of the students. Educators have had to make decisions about what type of service models they could fund. So right now, consultative services for autism and orthopedic impairment. And then for traumatic brain injury, we have an amazing liaison model throughout the state. And did you know back in 2007 is when they actually added traumatic brain injury to our regional inclusive services. Just a note too, we used to be called regional programs. Nobody knew what the heck that meant. Some people thought it was sports teams. Some people thought it was other things. And so we really did a rebranding a few years ago and really felt the term regional inclusive services was the best way to kind of define what we provide when we support our low incidence disability. So regional inclusive services, or RISC, is what you'll see us refer to this program about. And so this is a map of the hubs. Since early 80s when the hubs were developed, they're pretty much the same. We did see section 6 and 8, that's up in Portland, up in Beaverton, those areas, that area was broken down into small areas. So these are the 8 regional hubs, and with each one of those regional hubs, there is an administrator and there is a traumatic brain injury liaison. So these are the hubs for all low incidence disabilities. One of the strong points of regional inclusive services is that we have a professional learning team. So each one of these hubs, for each of the low incidence disabilities, there's a professional learning team where people come across the state to talk about professional development for the low incidence disability area, and also talk about implementing evidence-based practices. Regional inclusive services really is a system of highly trained, highly skilled individuals across the state, and regional inclusive services are the glue that pulls the whole system together, keeps us all focusing on how we can best serve students with low incidence disabilities. Also through regional inclusive services, there also is a real equity focus. We would hope that a student that lives, say, out in Echo has similar services to a student that maybe is in Portland Public. So we really try to have consistency across the state. We strive for that. That is something that we always need to be diligent so we can have equity of services. So these are our administrators for regional inclusive services. This is a great group of gals. They are very intense about serving their students. They're very creative. They're very thoughtful. So if you ever have a question about regional inclusive service, these are the administrators you want to contact. And then this is our group of liaisons. This is an amazing, passionate group. They're so creative and very thoughtful. So this group of liaisons come together. We come together about once a month to talk about professional development. We talk about evidence-based practice. We talk about how we can provide support to traumatic brain injury students, or students even with concussions across the state. So this is a great sounding board. They're just a great fun group, but they really are looking at their communities. How can they get information out about traumatic brain injury? So this is a group of our superstar liaisons.
Linda, can I just say something for a second? Folks, as a liaison, one of the biggest job, and I know Agnes is on this call too, the 8 of us go out and really do a lot of trainings with school staff. So you heard Linda say on a previous slide, there's only 313 students in the state of Oregon with the TBI eligibility. And we know that just can't be quite right. So one of our big jobs is training. So when you don't know what to do in a case, when a student comes back to your school, that's what we do. We're here to help you with anything. If you can't get a report from another agency, that's what we do. So I see your next slide. So go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah. So the role of TBI, a lot of times they're out beating the bushes, just making sure people are aware that school districts are here, we're supporting students, they connect with hospitals and communities. They are the primary contact. They get calls from all over the place about students that may have had accidents or some type of incidents. They are a mentor, they are an assistant. Um, they keep track of everything, they build capacity. What you'll find this group of people do is they do what needs to be done to get the word out, to make connections, to provide support. They're also there for parents. If you have a child who's had some type of traumatic brain injury or some type of concussion, those first days, weeks, months, and years of that experience, it's kind of difficult. So our mentors our TBI liaisons can be another sounding board and support system. So this is an amazing group. Every region's a little bit different. There's a little bit different rhythm to each group, but this group of people are the contacts and the hubs of the TBI system in our state. So Melanie, do you have any other things you want to share about the role?
No, that you covered it. But yeah, please use your liaisons anytime. And if you're here from another state, I'm happy to help you out with any questions you might have.
Yeah, and just another word too, when we look across the United States, Oregon is so very unique in how we have this TBI liaison system across the state. Other states would very much like to have this type of organization. So we're very fortunate to have the thoughtfulness of our educators 40 years ago to develop this system. But it's a great way to keep everybody connected, focused on kids, focused on professional development, and really focused on how do we implement evidence-based practice to support these kids. So special education evaluation process. I wanted to highlight this. First thing I wanted to do is talk about the definition. We worked a bit on this a couple years ago, and what we heard from the field is when you're looking at any eligibility, including TBI, there's really two different things. There's the developmental progress for kids that are age 8 through 5, and then educational performance. This is under IDA Part B, so we cover students age 3 up to 21. So when we were developing the definitions, we really wanted to be very purposeful in using the term developmental progress and educational performance for our school age kids. In this definition, you can see that it applies to open or closed head injuries resulting in impairment in one or more of the following areas. So we look at cognition, language, memory, attention, reasoning, abstract thinking, judgment. So we look at all those components. But we do need to note that this does not include students that have some type of congenital or degenerative type of brain condition. So it really is some type of external force that's caused the injury to the student. Let me see if I can do this. I want to put up, oh shoot, I should have had it opened. Well, let me talk you through the eligibility form just for a moment. Second, let me do that. Okay, so the evaluation components, these are the evaluation components, and it's very important to note that all these things need to be completed. We need to have a medical examination that indicates that there's a traumatic brain injury or a guided credible history interview, and we'll talk a bit about that here in a minute. We need to have a psychological assessment, maybe more than one, because these students are kind of complex in their cognitive thinking. So it might take more than one type of psychological assessment to kind of tease out the student's needs. We also need to have a developmental history, really understanding, the prenatal, the birthing process, some of those early childhood years, some of the life journeys of the student. That really is really helpful. And as we look at evaluations across the state, this is probably an area that we need to be a little bit more thoughtful and really being better special education detectives when we're having those developmental history conversations to really kind of really consider everything that's happened to this child, and are there other areas of disability we should be considering. It's also important that we conduct additional information so we can understand if there's other suspected disability areas. It could be TBI, but we're also looking at specific learning disability. It could be that we're also looking at maybe a vision impairment or or some type of deaf hard of hearing. So the tests do need to take into account and be given to consider other disabilities. We need to have an observation in at least one setting. And I know when I was working with my teams, I also wanted to have that in really multiple settings. A child will be very different in, say, a recess type of setting compared to reading instruction. So it's really nice to kind of get a snapshot of a student through a variety of educational places. And then any additional information to understand the disability or to understand the educational needs of the student. So it's pretty comprehensive evaluation. Many of these components are the same components in all evaluations to determine eligibility. Credible history interview. Just a little bit about this. We were so fortunate to be able to get this into our organ administrative rules a couple of years ago. And the reason we went down this path is because we found that we had many students that had never accessed any type of medical support after their injury. Some of these students were coming to us from out of the state or out of the country. They may have been foster care kids. They may have been students that, due to poverty, they never accessed medical, any type of medical support. But what we found in looking at students with traumatic brain injuries, it's that family members and close members to or individuals to the child can really define and tell you about how the child was pre-injury. You know, they were delightful, they were funny, they, you know, had great balance, great athletes. And then there was some type of traumatic injury, you know, be it a car accident, falling out of a window. And then after that event, the child acted different, responded different. And so there's a very clear pattern of before injury, after injury. And so the credible history interview process, the process needs to be guided in the interview conducted by someone that really understands TBI. If there's a school psych available, they would be an ideal person to conduct this, but we know not all school districts have school psychs available. So a special education teacher that has a great deal of information and insight into TBI. But we're really trying to ask thoughtful questions of the parents to really understand the journey of the child. But we also understand during the credible history interview, there may be questions that we ask the parents don't feel comfortable in answering, which is okay. So credible history interview, it's been a great addition to our comprehensive evaluation. Since we've implemented this, we've seen our numbers go up about 20 kids. So we are really seeing that with this credible history interview, we're starting to break down those barriers and get students eligible for TBI that may in the past may have not been eligible.
Linda, can I just pop in for a second too?
Sure.
Everyone, that credible history is going to be, and I just put in the chat, returntoschool.org. That is our website. And you can find that credible history form in that website at any time. If you have troubles finding that, just send me an email and I'll send you a PDF of it.
Okay, sounds good. And so for the criteria, we need to answer the question. If you were looking at the eligibility form, these are all yes, no. So have you developed conducted a comprehensive evaluation? Yes, no. Child evaluated in all suspected disability areas, yes or no. The child had an acquired injury to the brain caused by external force, yes or no. And then that injury lasts longer than 60 days. And then we look at the whole list of impacts, could be communication barriers, cognitive, sensory. So on the eligibility form, it would be a yes, no for each one of these. And so for special, to be eligible under TBI, all the answers to these would be yes. For the question with the 4 different areas, you only need to have one of those areas that has been noted to be impact based on the evaluation. And then these are the questions that we ask. The concerns aren't due to lack of reading instruction, and that's a hard one because we know some students have really poor attendance. So you really need to look at their attendance record. Have they really been in school? Do you see big gaps in their learning? We also need to have a question or conversation about are the concerns due to a limited English proficiency? And then the final 2 questions are, And I wish I could have showed the eligibility form. The two questions are, the child has a traumatic brain injury as defined. And so when we went to the slide and we had that eligibility, when you looked at that eligibility, that's the definition. So when a team is sitting around that eligibility form, they'll see the definition at the very top. And so we did that very purposefully. So when you're having that eligibility meeting, we can talk about that definition. And so the whole group can be really have a foundation of, this is the definition of traumatic brain injury. So that's why we put it at the very top of the form. And so you would have to answer that question. And then the next question on the eligibility form does have this exact language: the child is eligible for special education services according to these two OARs. To be honest, I went around and around with my leadership team on that. We had to put this type of language in, but really what these two OERs refer back to is specially designed instruction and related services. So the team is saying that the child does meet the definition of TBI, and the child needs to have specially designed instruction or related services as it relates to traumatic brain injury. So to be eligible for both of those things, you need to have yes for both of those to be a TBI eligibility. Now, there are times where we'll have a child that, yes, you've met the definition, but we're not seeing that educational impact, and that answer would be no. And if that's the journey, then we're going to be looking more at a 504 civil rights, providing accommodations, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so 504, it's a civil rights, it is 504 civil rights plans. The big difference between a 504 plan and an IEP, 504 plans only provide accommodations. So you change slightly the dynamics of the child's learning. You may give them more time. You might give them a place to learn that's quieter. You might give them a visual opportunity to learn something, auditory opportunity. So you provide them accommodations to their learning. You're not providing specially designed instruction. You're not providing that specially designed instruction that's related to a goal. So 504s, we have a lot of kids that have a traumatic brain injury that come in because they need accommodations, and oftentimes the 504 is their first stop. Melody, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, I was also on that returntoschool.org, folks. We have 504s and IEP goals that are also on there. They are sample goals that you can look at and see if they apply to your student. And again, if you have any troubles, just give me contact me anytime, and I can help you walk through the eligibility and or how to write a 504 for a student with a TBI. I got a lot of calls during the shutdown to how in the world do we write a 504 for a kid that is doing online. And so we know that some of our students are still doing online schooling, and so I can help you out with that as well.
Good. So just a few other thoughts about 504s. They really contain the information, the input from the parents, from the doctor, from the school nurse. So they really have a great definition of, this is what we're seeing of the child, kind of a written up, maybe paragraph form. Also talks about academic accommodations and related services the student might need. 504s and going through that process also helps with the child find responsibilities, that you're really trying to look at the needs of all the students in your school district, and students that have had some type of injury, you're considering their needs. And it really provides a concise documentation of the student's condition and the help the school provided in the response. So when you look at the totality of the information in a child's folder, a 504 is a really important documentation to have. Okay, so let's talk about, go to the next slide. So House Bill 4140. So this passed in 2020, it passed. And so basically what this bill is, and why Melissa and the team really pushed this through the state legislature, is because we saw students that were coming to school. We were getting information that they had maybe some type of sports concussion, They were in some type of accident, and so they had recently had some type of situation, and they're coming back to school. And instead of coming back to school and just waiting for things to happen and waiting to see what happens, House Bill 4140 really is a glide path back into school. We want to get kids in school, but we also want to have the team members and the staff members in the school to have a very clear understanding. When a parent provides you information about a child having an injury, what is the process that we're going to go through to acknowledge that information, and what are the steps are we going to take as a team to consider how we can support this student. So House Bill 4140 is really that first step of coordinated, thoughtful support for students. It's the first step when they come back. And so with House Bill 4140, ODE was mandated to develop a form. I also need to share that ODE is mandated to develop a form, and we've done that. We were mandated to share the form with all the school districts, and we've done that. But that bill did not go further in saying it was a requirement for school districts to use, which is concerning. So as we work with our state legislature, there's ongoing work that needs to take place to make certain that all students that have had some type of injury, that school districts have a system set up that if the school nurse or the person at the front desk hear of a student having injury, how do we respond as a school district? Who gets that information? How do we document that? How do we document the input from the parent? And so the form that we've developed, and this is just the front page of it, we've worked with school nurses, we've worked with the Oregon Health Authority, ODE, develop this. And so what we tried to do is get our best minds together to develop this form to really be a great documentation point for 4140 for those kids coming back to school in those first thoughts.
Linda, can I just chat about that for a second?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example, folks. So a student comes back to your school district and they have accommodations from a doctor or a neuropsych. I would just highly recommend that you get that form quickly, fill it out, put in as many accommodations as you think that child will need to be successful at that time, upload it into your system and email that to every teacher that works with that child. And just know that, as we all know with TBI, students' accommodations could change. We need to add new ones. We need to take some away. And you want to meet at least once a month, I tell teams, and just tweak that form and just upload the changes and make sure that that's a running document. That's just when we think about litigation, okay, or what's best for students as well. Just have that document uploaded and make it current.
Yeah. So here's the front page, the first page of it, the document. We do have an area in here for physician signature. However, we don't want not having that signature to hold up the student. So it could be a school nurse. It could be someone with the medical background that's included on the team and signs saying, we're part of the team, we've heard this information. So not having a specific doctor's signature shouldn't hold up this process at all. Other components of this is really a focus on what are the students' current symptoms. And we try to make the form pretty easy, just checking off the students currently experiencing this thing. But we also realize that this form is very it's a living document, and a student's symptoms may change or vary over the time. So this is another great way, as Melanie talked about, meeting every month, pulling this form out. Or is the student still experiencing these things? Or are they experiencing perhaps other things? So that's section 2 of the form. So things to think about this. What is the communication for the school staff and parents to learn about this form? How do they know about it? I know many school districts have put this up on their website, and I wish maybe that trend would continue in some other districts. How will school staff and parents access this form? How will your school district handle information that is shared regarding a possible traumatic brain injury? You need to kind of have that hub. you know, if someone finds out about it, we tell this person. So there really needs to be kind of a point of contact for TBI. And then the team should work together to complete this form. Who should be on the team? Anybody that really understands that student and can have a meaningful input about how we can accommodate and support the student. So this is really a really important documentation point. Often see that this form, these conversations, is the first step, but maybe the second step is to think of about a 504 and then possibly a special education. So this is kind of one step along the journey. The other group of people that need to be very aware of this process are really the risk managers in the school district. If a school district implements this process with fidelity, and if there's concerns down the road, the school district has a documentation that, yes, we learned this concern about this student and this is how we handled it. It would be less helpful if you're a school district and yeah, you heard about something and you never did anything. So from a risk management point of view from the school district, this is kind of an insurance thoughtful process that you can help that, yes, you're taking information you have about students very thoughtfully and you're really as a team working to support that student. So pretty important. Who are the members on your school team that should be aware of this? Again, the risk management team, your administrators, school nurses, athletic directors, special ed directors, school psychologists, school counselors. Your whole school team should be very aware of this. If you hear about a student with some type of traumatic brain injury, let's get this information to the right person. So we really need to kind of throw a big net out to your school district just to keep make certain that people are aware, and if they do find out of a student having some type of injury, who do they talk to? It's the first step. Okay, some of the things in thinking of the future, ODE and the state and the whole country is really focusing on more inclusive practices, and we're striving for that for students with traumatic brain injuries. In the past, a student with a traumatic brain injury may have automatically been put in a very restrictive placement, and we're really trying to lift that out. We're trying to make certain that all students have the ability to be have access to the general curriculum, but also access to their peers. So we're striving to have less and less siloing of kids, less and less of pulling kids apart away from everybody, and more of inclusive practice. And you'll see the ODE is really striving to do that. It's just a big pillar of everything we're doing. The other big thing that there's a big push for is accessible education and materials. And how that helps students with traumatic brain injury is maybe after injury, a student doesn't have the ability, maybe reading is difficult for them. Then maybe perhaps for that student, you can provide like auditory books for them. Can you provide things maybe in bigger print? So looking at accessible education materials, and we want those materials provided for the student at the same time all the other students are accessing that same subject or that same area of learning. So accessible education and materials, when school districts do this well, even when they're initially buying curriculum for science, math, or whatever, they're thinking about the accessibility from the ground level. They're thinking about how do students with visual impairments access things? How do they have deaf and hard of hearing students? How is that accessible for them? What if you have a print disability? So you'll find more and more language coming from the Oregon Department of Education, from the very first procurement stuff for buying a curriculum or educational material to accessibility is thought of at the very, very beginning. We're also looking at and having an emphasis on teacher-made things, making certain those education materials are accessible too. So in the state of Oregon right now, we're part of a national cohort group, and we're striving to develop a statewide system for accessible education materials that would go from birth all the way up to higher education workforce development, that through accessible education materials that we would be using a consistent vocabulary across the state, that we would have consistent professional development and a consistent way to share that. So we are currently working on Oregon Educational Resources for AIM. It will be at our AIM hub. And within that hub, you will see information about how do you do procurement with accessibility? How do you find a child when you're looking at accessible education materials? How do you determine what a student needs? There's going to be accessible education materials for students with vision impairment, deaf, hard of hearing. So there'll be a great deal of that. There also will be within that hub a lot of professional development video clips. So as administrators look at accessible education materials and implement those practices within the school, this hub will have that professional development too. It'll also be a great place for individuals to come in and look at any of the legal requirements for accessible education materials. We're going to have a section on student advocacy. How do we teach the students to be able to advocate for their own needs? So that will be an important part of that too. So there'll be more information coming, but accessible educational materials, you'll hear ODE talking more and more about that, and that if we do that well, it's another pillar for inclusion. The other big thing we're going to be working on is evidence-based practices, and our friends at CBERT in their research is helping us to define and understand what are those evidence-based practices that really have the best results for our students who have experienced a traumatic brain injury. And then these are some sites that we can go to. Let's see if it will let me do this. So this first one, it's going to let me go to drag it over here. So can you see that? Do you see that?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So this is the Oregon Department of Education traumatic brain injury information. So you'll see a little bit of information about regional inclusive services. Here's some information about what a traumatic brain injury is. Here's a direct link to each of our regional inclusive services areas. So this goes right to each one of those ESDs. And then you'll also find that we have House Bill 4140 resources. We have an FAQ. We have an accommodation form. We also developed a technical assistance manual here. You'll see our revised OER and information about that, our eligibility forms here. So everything about TBI from the ODE lens is in this one place. And so a lot of great information there. Okay, let me see if it will let me open up this next website. And so this is the Return to Learn, and Melissa Gilbert and her friends, Melissa McCart and her friends at CBERT and her team of putting this together. So what they've done is this website really has the professional development, and there's all kind of different videos available here. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for everything around professional development. You'll see it gives you events for educators. They have great videos, recorded webinars. We have tools. The tools aren't working out. And then also talking about your TBI team. So this is another great resource for school districts. And then let me see if I'll open this one. Okay, and so again, this is from our friends at CBERT and talking about, these are all the events they have planned. So we have our little chat today, we have Trauma 101 coming up, and the CBERT team, along with the TBI liaisons, work together, really find out what are the critical information that's needed. And so they develop all kind of amazing webinars. So it's one-stop shop for events there. And then one more here. And this is the CBERT website, and this is really the research side of the CBERT work. And so they just do so much. And so just a little bit about CBERT. They serve Oregon and they're doing a ton of research, but some of the other things they're doing, for example, they're up in Alaska right now, developing a TBI screening for their juvenile detention facilities. And so they're asking 4 simple questions. I don't know the questions right offhand, but they're basic things, have you had an injury? And what they're able to do is start screening for TBI in some of their juvenile detention centers. Melissa has been speaking not only through the United States, but some international things. So this is an amazing group of individuals that really look at TBI and research and really trying to understand what's the best practice for serving these students. Melanie, do you have any other comments about CBERT and things they do?
Oh, well, thank you. Folks, Linda just put up the website that I put in the chat box, returntoschool.org. And just know that you can click onto those webinars on a Saturday if you want and get some of your PDUs. And Linda scrolled through some of the different webinars that we have coming up, and they are amazing. So please take a peek at that. And I'm going to be sending them out to my region. And so be aware, and they are free if you are on our team. So, and also there's the credible history was on that return to learn. Anything, like she said, one-stop shopping on that. So yeah, go ahead and take a look at it.
Oops, went too far. All right, let me see if it will let me show this video. Oh, why is it doing that? Oh, me and technology, we have to fight every day. No, maybe it's not going to let me do it today. Well, I can put the link into the chat, but this is just a really nice little video. It's like 2 minutes long and really is for educators to really kind of understand TBI and the importance of listening to parents, acknowledging things that are going on with the students. And it's a really great way and reminder of how we can come together to support students. And then just a little bit, I'm here to help. Here's my email address as well as my telephone number. And I know this has been a whirlwind through TBI and all the things that you need to be aware of to support students with some type of traumatic brain injury or a concussion. And so I'm here to help. So it sounds like we have a little bit of time for questions. What kind of questions do you have?
Please put them in the chat box, everyone. So Linda, while we're waiting for questions to come in, I just want to share too that you did a lovely job of speaking to evidence-based practices. And as you've been an educator for 43 years, and things have come and changed and it went back and the pendulum has swung. But I just want to encourage everybody with TBI, it's like any special ed kid, there's no one fix. It changes. We need to look outside the box and always be looking at evidence-based practice. What is best for kids? And when we think about an individualized education plan, it truly needs to be, by virtue of those words, individualized. And so, okay. So people are asking about the slides.
Yeah.
Did you receive them this morning? Yes. Okay. If you didn't receive them, please put your name please email me and I'll send those out to you, but I think they were sent out today.
Yeah, and we can send out that TBI eligibility form too with that.
Right. And that is also on the returntoschool.org. Get that there as well.
Yeah, and it's on the ODE special education form page, and it's in like Chinese, Vietnamese, Arabic, Spanish, Russian. So it's available in several different languages.
Right. Okay.
And I guess as we think about kind of final moments, I do want to share a story with you. This happened a couple years ago, and I got a phone call. A lot of times, educational specialists, we answer the phone number that's on the back of the parent rights. And so I got a phone call from this mom. Child was in junior high, very frustrated that the student wasn't doing well. She indicated that her child has a specific learning disability. And the more she talked, this child just did not sound like a specific learning disability kid. And I asked her, I said, did your child ever have any type of traumatic brain injury or car accident or fall out of a window where they hit their head? And she started crying, and she told me that when he was 4 years of age, that her son flipped over the handlebars, was knocked out, and they don't know how long he was knocked out. When he did get medical attention, they had to take part of his skull out and drain the blood because it was, starting to build up. And she said, well, the doctor put him back together and said that he would be all right. She says, I haven't thought about that in all these years. Do you think he could have a traumatic brain injury? And I said, that's an important piece of information for your special education team to really think about and understand, because I said that when you're a teacher, you have a specific box for a specific learning disability kind of set of strategies. But if you have a child with a traumatic brain injury, it's a very different toolbox. It's a very different thought process. And so she has told me how her child had been on all type of ADHD medicine that didn't help. And I said, did you ever mention this to your medical professionals? She said, no, I never thought about that. So when you're looking at that developmental history, and even maybe if the team's not thinking about traumatic brain injury, asking those questions of parents to kind of tease out some of that stuff. It could be, something that happened to the child 10 or 15 years ago that's so relevant now. And I said, when your son had this injury, was he had a certain profile personality, and then this injury, and then afterwards it was very different? And she said, she talked about he was a delightful, bubbly, happy kid, had this injury, and then afterwards was very moody, mad, agitated all the time. And so just I share that it's so important to ask those questions to parents. Sometimes parents might not want to answer those questions, but I think that we can't lose that history. The other thing that we see often happens too is that early childhood teens will hear about traumatic brain injury. They'll find the child eligible under developmental delay, and then they move into school with that developmental delay, and that information about TBI is lost in that journey. So trying to make certain that that thread of that event happening to that student is known to the team and understood, and how does that impact how the student's doing now. So that's really important too. So any other questions?
Lynn, I just want to go, I'm getting some in the chat box talking about, previous history of head injury that they heard about years ago. And that's again, when that credible history is going to come into play that we can utilize. And there was a question about how do we get a hold of that? And that is on our returntoschool.org. There's a webinar by one of our liaisons in Salem area, Bethany Bauer. She did an entire webinar on how to do the credible history. She's a school psych. And there was another question about evaluations. In addition, and skills you might want to utilize. You're going to find that information in that webinar, but we can certainly speak to that. If you want to send me an email, I can elaborate on that. I just want to go back to what Linda said about, when kids end up in early intervention and there's a head injury, then we put the DD eligibility on them, which is good till 9. But then what? And then I see school age kids, we're not quite sure if it's a head injury, so we're going to say it's other health impaired. Lovely, they get services, but the problem is when they graduate, there could be problems accessing other services like voc rehab or social security, disability determination. So we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, and we saw from a previous slide, the 313 TBI kids in all of Oregon. That's just not right. Once again, reach out if you have any questions about TBI eligibility. We are here for you. I go to eligibility meetings all the time. I speak to teams. I go to 504 meetings, and that's what a liaison does. So, okay, and I just lost my chat here for a minute.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to call and just chat about any of these components of TBI, I'd be more than happy. This is a whirlwind tour of everything around TBI, but it's good that this group is listening and here and kind of getting that nuggets of knowledge. And so you can take this knowledge and share it with your team. And I think the most important advice we can give is just for teams to be very sensitive to experiences of the kids and really understanding and how does that impact now.
Yeah. And I think certainly I got loads and loads of calls after the shutdown because there were a lot of head injuries that we didn't hear about because kids were at home. They weren't documented. There was a lot of abuse at all. And so folks, we have our work cut out for us, and I'm really happy that you are here and on this webinar. And I just want to encourage you to establish your teams in your schools, because those teams in your areas will work with schools, hospitals, parents, and just that whole dynamic. And if we all work together, gosh, there's a lot of good things that happen, right?
Mhm. Well, it's nice to know that in the state of Oregon, we have an amazing group of liaisons that are knitted together, working together, trying to get that big Oregon national look. That
Mhm.
group also trying to connect with hospitals. It's funny. Melissa will get information from OHSU. They can't share information, but we know there's a kid at this school district. We know they're in this grade. And so Melissa and Siebert, they do a little bit of research and detective work to kind of find out who that kid might be. So they're connected, and we're beating the bush trying to do the best things for kids.
Yeah, and also with your liaisons, if you're having troubles getting a report, say from Oregon Health Sciences University or another hospital, just call us. We do have a lot of good partnerships with those different medical facilities in the state, and we can help you get that report ASAP if need be. So, okay, we're about 8:53 now. I don't see any other questions. Okay. Linda, did you want to say anything in summation for your 43 years and what you want to tell these young people to go forth and
My
do?
first year teaching, my first day was September 1st, 1980. And I think of any advice I can give is just keep your focus on kids. Never lose that voice of kids. So many times we do things to students instead of with them. I know when as a special ed director, I even have like kindergarten, first grade kids at the IEP meetings, and they would tell me stuff that's hard and stuff that they like. So just really listen to your children. They tell us what they need if we pay attention to them. They're kind of little open books, but never lose the voice of a child through this whole process. They're rare and unique in each one, and should be treated with the highest level of dignity and respect, and just trying to understand that each child's trying to do the very best they can in the life journey they're on.
Well said. Well said.
Okay.
Okay, folks, I'm going to put my email in the chat again. If you need anything, please reach out to me. Okay, Serena, amazing wealth of knowledge, 43 years. Congrats, Linda. And we all share in that sentiment. Well done. What a great journey you've been on, 43 years. And I just have no clue who's going to replace you. I'm a little concerned.
Yeah.
All right, folks.
Bunch of amazing kids over the years. And I think the kids have taught me far more than any other college class ever did. Just paying attention to kids.
Yeah.
So we'll stay on a couple of minutes and see as people kind of take off for the rest of their day. Have a good rest of the day. And thanks for everything you do for Oregon's kids. It's one kid at a time, one moment at a time.
Well said. Well said. Thank you all. And this webinar will be recorded and up on our website, returntoschool.org, if you ever want to look at it again.